Picture this, okay? You're on a popular hiking trail, not some remote wilderness type of scene. Not some treacherous mountain path, a simple 4.5-mile loop that thousands of people walk every year. The kind of trail where you can hear other hikers' voices echoing right through the trees. Now imagine taking just one step and then ceasing to exist. Because that's exactly what happened to Joe Wood. One footprint in the dirt and then nothing. As if the forest itself had reached out and plucked him from existence. But here's the terrifying part. In the days before Joe vanished, he told his wife something was very wrong with that trail. Something about the way that the shadows moved between the trees. And something about the silence that fell when no one else was around but himself. This isn't just another missing hiker story. This is about what happens when nature itself decides to collect. Mount Rainier on July 8th, 1999 is the kind of place on a summer day in the Pacific Northwest that it's famous for. You know, its mild temperatures, a light mist clinging to the Douglas firs, and the perpetual twilight that lives beneath the ancient canopy. Perfect hiking weather, perfect conditions, and perfect for disappearing. So Joe Wood was 32 years old and he was a computer analyst from Sunnyside, Washington. The kind of guy who approached everything in life with a careful precision. His colleagues called him methodical, and his friends called him prepared. His wife called him predictable, and she meant it in the highest compliment way. And this was not his first time on the Rampart Ridge Trail. It wasn't even his 10th time. Wasn't his 20th. Joe knew this trail like the back of his hand because it was his every morning commute. Every switchback, every vista point, every place where the routes crossed the path, he knew. Which makes what happened next impossible. Or at least it should have been. Okay, so you see 3 weeks before he disappeared, Joe noticed something odd about his compass when hiking that trail. Nothing dramatic, just a slight wobble in that needle when he passed certain points. The kind of thing that most people would just totally ignore. But Joe wasn't most people. And 2 weeks before, he started taking photographs of the trail. And they weren't scenic shots. They weren't tourist photos. They were methodical documentation. Every 50 feet, even the empty stretches where there was nothing to photograph but trees and shadows. And then 1 week before, he mentioned to his wife that the trail somehow now felt different. Like walking through someone else's memories, he said. And she, laughed it off at the time. But she does not laugh it off anymore. So July 8th started just like any other day hiking for Joe. He parked his car in the lot at 9:47 a.m. And we know the exact time because Joe always set his car's clock 5 minutes fast, always. And from there, he signed the trail register, noted the weather conditions, clear visibility, a light breeze, perfect hiking day. And then at 10:15 a.m., a family of 4 passed him on the trail. They remembered him because he was so friendly, taking the time to point out a rare wildflower to their children. And then at 11:23 a.m., a solo hiker had passed him, remembering him checking his compass. And he remembered thinking it was odd because the trail was so well marked. Why does he have his compass out? And then at 12:14 p.m., another group saw him. He was standing still, just staring into the forest, and he was just staring. And when they asked if he was okay, he smiled and said, "Yep, I'm fine, just listening." And that right there was the last time that anybody would see Joe Wood. The first sign that something was wrong was at 6:30 p.m. when Joe's wife called the ranger station. Joe was never late, never. He had dinner plans that evening, reservations at 7 p.m. So now we get into the initial search where they found his car in the parking lot. Everything, normal, everything ordinary. His trail signature is on the register, normal, ordinary. But on the trail itself, that's where things stopped being normal. Because you see what they found was literally one footprint. One single footprint, perfectly preserved in a patch of this soft dirt. The tread pattern matched Joe's hiking boots exactly. But here's the thing about footprints. They don't just stop and vanish out of nowhere. They don't just end in the middle of stride, but somehow this one did. What followed this was one of the most thorough searches in Mount Rainier's history. Over 150 searchers, helicopters with thermal imaging, and search dogs. But you see, the dogs, and this might add to the story, the dogs really kind of acted strange. I mean, they would follow Joe's scent for 1 minute in certain parts of the trail, but then they would stop and, not lose the scent of Joe. They stopped, like almost hitting an invisible wall. The helicopter pilots reported these equipment malfunctions, not major ones, just weird ones, radio static that came in at certain points, compass variations. And one pilot swore that his altimeter jumped 500 feet while hovering perfectly still. And as the search then expanded, they found things, strange things. They found Joe's compass. It was lying right there on the trail. The needle, though, was spinning continuously, even when the compass was perfectly still. His camera was found in his car, and the last 3 photos were completely black. Not underexposed, not covered, black, as if he had photographed the absence of light itself. In his trail notes, which were meticulously documented on his phone, the last entry timestamped at 12:17 p.m. And it said, "The silence is wrong." Now here's where it even gets darker, because Joe Wood wasn't the first person to disappear on Mount Rainier. He wasn't even the first to vanish from that specific trail. In 1952, a surveyor vanishes while mapping that area. And in 1973, a pair of hikers disappear within a month of each other. And then in 1988, a Forest Service employee goes missing. All from different sections of the same trail. All in areas where compass readings got strange. All in places where the forest goes quiet. And the local tribes there had names for places like this. Places where the world grows thin. Where the boundary between here and somewhere else becomes permeable. And they called them the hungry places. Sites where the forest itself develops an appetite. Where it learns to take. In fact, they warned the first European settlers about these spots. And they warned them about the silence that comes right before. And they even warned them about the shadows that move wrong. But no one listened, and people rarely do when it comes to these things. The official investigation explored multiple possibilities. Voluntary disappearance was one, but his bank accounts were untouched, his passport unused, his life insurance unpaid. So another theory was animal attack, but to this, there was absolutely no evidence, no blood, no signs of a struggle, not even a scuffed footprint. And then there was an accident. But on a well-maintained trail with perfect weather, with his level of experience? But there are other theories, darker theories, and some point to the compass anomalies, the electronic malfunctions, the strange behavior of the search dogs. They talk about natural phenomenon that can bend space and time. About doorways that open when certain conditions align. Others focus on the silence, the wrong silence, the hungry silence. Today, the Rampart Ridge still draws thousands of hikers every year. Most of them do not know about Joe Wood. And they don't know about the others who vanished there as well. And they don't know about the compass anomalies that still occur to this day. And they don't know the strange silence that sometimes falls even in the middle of a busy day. And they certainly don't know about a single footprint that occasionally appears and ends mid-stride. So the next time you are hiking a popular trail and everything feels safe and normal and ordinary, remember Joe Wood. Remember that he knew this trail better than anybody else. Remember that sometimes the most dangerous trails aren't the ones that seem threatening. In fact, they're the ones that look perfectly safe. Because nature, it doesn't always kill with claws and teeth. Sometimes it simply collects. And the most terrifying part? It's still collecting. On a bitterly cold winter day in 1999, the small town of Krahulov in the Czech Republic was struck by a horrifying mystery. Vladimir Bastille, a hard-working man on his way to work, seemingly vanished into thin air. His footprints in the snow led to nowhere, abruptly just disappearing as if he had been snatched up by some invisible force. Panic and confusion swept through this quiet little town as people wondered what could have happened. Eyewitnesses reported seeing Vladimir walking along the desolate road at dawn, his figure illuminated by the pale moonlight. And then just a few hours later, his co-workers realized that he never showed up for work. And the abandoned house where he was supposed to be stood ominously there with its lights off, leaving no clues of Vladimir's whereabouts. Fear and unease spread through Krahulov like wildfire as word of Vladimir's mysterious disappearance spread. So his boss was immediately notified, but no one could explain how a man could vanish into thin air on a clear winter morning without a trace. And as fear gripped Vladimir's boss as he arrived at his employee's house, knowing something was terribly wrong, he decided to search every inch of that deserted home, finding only untouched breakfast and a cold cup of coffee on the table. So at this point, desperate for answers, he had an idea. So he released Vladimir's faithful dog from its leash, hoping that it could lead him to its owner. And so the dog was pulling ahead, eagerly following a trail of footprints in the fresh snow that led away from the house and towards Vladimir's place of work. And the further away that they traveled, the more chaotic and erratic the prints became, until suddenly the prints stopped altogether. And that's when the dog was just whimpering and growling, refusing to leave this ominous spot on the road. With this sinking feeling, Vladimir's boss picked up the trembling animal and carried it all the way back to the village. And like I said, as sun rose, panic spread through this town like wildfire, and the police were immediately called as an intense search of the area began. Every single inch was scoured by determined officers, firefighters, and even residents from neighboring villages that just joined in to help. But not one single clue could be found about Vladimir's disappearance. And as weeks passed by with no progress made in the search, eventually it was reluctantly called off until the snow melted in the spring. But even then, the police continued to comb through every inch of the area, the forests and the lakes and even abandoned buildings, searching for any sign of what could have happened to poor Vladimir. But they found nothing, not even a trace or any evidence of a crime, just this eerie silence that seemed to hang over this village. Not to mention, a couple of days after Vladimir's disappearance came, this strange barking of all the dogs echoing throughout the streets happened day and night. It was these unnerving sounds that sent shivers down the spines of the villagers as they wondered if it held any connection to Vladimir's mysterious disappearance. Plus, going back after just 3 days of searching, Vladimir's faithful dog mysteriously also vanished without a trace, which just added to this chilling mystery surrounding the disappearance. So desperate for answers, his family clings to these paranormal theories that they've always believed in. That their beloved son was taken by aliens or somehow slipped into another time or dimension. Believe it or not, Vladimir himself was the only skeptic in the family, refusing to entertain such far-fetched ideas about aliens and stuff like that. And the police have their own theories, suggesting that he may have been struck by a car and his body disposed of elsewhere. However, skeptics argue against this possibility, pointing out that there would be clear evidence of an accident, yet there was none. So as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, it seemed that the truth behind Vladimir's disappearance may never be revealed. And his family can only hope for closure someday, praying for some shred of information that will bring them peace after losing their loved one in such a perplexing way. As the sun rose on September 16th, 1941, Luke Kikendall, an elderly bank employee of 65 years, kicked off his hunting trip with Earl and his other friend Vetter to Sugar Pine Mountain in the Sierra National Forest. And the air was thick with anticipation as Kikendall's heart condition hindered his mobility, and he had chosen to stay behind at camp to stretch while his friends went and hunted for deer. But as soon as Vetter left the camp, he returned shouting that he mistakenly shot Ray. A tragic mistake that echoed through the wilderness like a shining beacon of darkness. Kikendall's body literally stiffened in horror as he feared for his friend's life. So Vetter sprinted into the forest, and his breath was ragged and wild with fear, and he was determined to bring Ray's body back to camp. But by the time he returned with the other hunters that were around, Kikendall had disappeared. The Madeira Tribune reported that search parties were dispatched throughout Sugar Pine Mountain as Sierra National Forest rangers and Fresco County authorities scoured the area for any trace of Luke. The Sierra National Forest guards, hunters, and cattlemen combed through the rugged terrain for 4 long weeks in search of Kikendall. Despite their valiant efforts, the search yielded no results. It was as if he literally vanished by being sunk through the ground. No trace of him was found, despite a widespread search around the hunting camp where he disappeared from. However, one small clue gave them hope: an obscure shoe imprint that could only be identified as similar to the ones that Kikendall wore. And this print was discovered after traversing unusually difficult terrain about 3 miles away from the camp. And unfortunately, it couldn't be conclusively identified as his because hunters commonly wore the same shoes. So the Kikendall brothers, nephew William and Melvin, desperately searched for their missing father in the wilds of Northern California, a mere stone's throw away from where his imprint was found. A deep and imposing gorge dropped off into this raging North Fork, which could have washed away a body into the abyss. So with no leads, they explored the possibility either that their father had been accidentally shot by another hunter who then went and buried the body, but nothing brought them closer to solving this mystery, regardless of what they might have thought happened. Forest Service officials revealed that the sons were not in agreement about the elderly man's ability to traverse the terrain. One son adamant that he could barely move without assistance, while the others declared he was a competent hiker and capable of walking as many as 5 miles with no difficulty. So somebody had it wrong here. But they all did agree on one thing: that Kikendall was practically blind without his glasses, and if he had lost them in the bush, he would be stranded, unable to find his way back. And the other hunters involved admitted to discouraging him from going further because they feared it would be too much for him. So they left him sitting on the trail about 200 yards away from the camp. And to this day, he's never been found or seen again. Lee Peltier was a 59-year-old outdoorsman. He lived on a 100-acre family farm in Lake Elmo, and he was an experienced hiker and hunter. Not that long ago, on November 2018, saw Lee Peltier and 3 other friends venture to the Anomaly State National Forest in Minnesota, heading towards a pond while staying at John Warner's cabin, who was a friend. As Megan Peltier later explained, her father was supposed to walk to a lower elevation where he could spook any deer drinking from the pond so that they would run out towards Warner. But when no deer appeared, Warner began to worry. He expected Peltier had gone after one alone. I mean, it is customary for hunters to fire 3 shots in the air if they are facing any kind of danger, but Warner heard nothing. And as lunchtime came and went without Peltier arriving, his friends began to worry. There was no cell phone signal at that cabin, so they couldn't call for help or even call him. And after building a bonfire in case he returned, they noticed that the rain turned into snow and the temperature started dropping. And knowing that they had to do something, The men drove out until they could get a cell phone signal and then called the authorities. Soon, 5 officers from the Pine County Sheriff's Office arrived and commenced a search by foot and ATV. But there was no sign of Peltier, nor any clues as to what happened. And as the news spread of his disappearance, hundreds of people joined the search for him. However, news reported that the search was unsuccessful. But the search parties continued to look for Peltier, and one theory was developed that he had fallen into the pond. However, data from his cell phone revealed that his phone had not died until 5:30 a.m., which could not have been the case if he had fallen in during the day. And it seemed that he had actually tried to call his friends just around afternoon time, but there was no signal, leaving his family and friends feeling both confused and upset. 2 years later, those sentiments still linger. And that's when KBJR News released an article stating, "Mystery Unsolved. It's been 2 years since a Twin Cities man disappeared in the Namaji forest while deer hunting, and his family are still looking for answers." I mean, Peltier was brightly dressed at the time, his daughter said, in an orange jacket, red sweatshirt, and an orange hat. Now, speaking to St. Paul's Pioneer Press, Peltier's son David, who owns a crane company, said they typically find lost people within half a mile of their last known location. And Peltier had no supplies with him when he vanished, no backpack, no water. So to have seen no trace of him, to have no signs, it's so bizarre, his daughter said. He's been hunting all of his life. I mean, he grew up on a farm, and he loved the outdoors. He would have known to fire his gun. He would have left a sign. But sadly, there is still no sign of Peltier.